Howard under fire as Labour demands answers on the children overboard saga. I'll prove you wrong. Slobodan Milošević opens his defence against war crimes charges. Arafat's admission. The Palestinian leader accepts responsibility for arms smuggling. And soccer, the latest victim of Argentina's economic crisis. Good evening, Lee Lin Chin with SBS World News Tonight. The Prime Minister has declared tonight that he did not lie to the Australian public when he backed claims that boat people had thrown their children into the ocean. Mr Howard told Parliament that no one had told him the claims were wrong. The opposition is pressing for a Senate inquiry into the affair and may force former Defence Minister Peter Reith to appear.
The opposition is on a mission, demanding to know what the Prime Minister knew about the children overboard claims and when he didn't know it.
Yours is a government which has lied, spied and denied.
Mr Howard is adamant the Defence Force told him that boat people had thrown children overboard, but never corrected that claim.
I was not told by my department, and I've checked with my staff, and they confirmed to me that they were not told by the department that the original information was wrong.
But the official report makes it clear the former Defence Minister, Peter Reith, was told repeatedly of doubts about the children overboard claims. Early in last year's election campaign, he said Navy photographs proved the claim.
Well, it did happen. The fact is the children were thrown into the water.
The same day, his office was advised there may have been a mix-up and the photos may be of the wrong event. And doubts too about the video, Mr Reith said, showed as an absolute fact that children were tossed overboard. On October 31st, a senior officer told the minister the video does not show a child being thrown in the water. Well, we'd better not see the video then, said Mr Reith. But if Mr Reith was informed the children overboard stories were wrong, the Prime Minister claims no one told him.
I don't believe it, Prime Minister, and I don't think anyone in Australia believes it. It beggars belief.
Mr Howard today distanced himself from his former Defence Minister. 2 days before the election, he said his ministers had assured him that the children overboard claims were correct.
And I checked that with both of them as recently as last night.
Prime Minister, who did you check with on the night of the 7th of November?
Prime Minister. To speak of the former Defence Minister.
The opposition is planning a Senate inquiry into the affair and may attempt to force the former Defence Minister, who is now retired from politics, back to Canberra to testify.
A short time ago, I spoke to SBS chief political correspondent Dennis Grant and asked him how key figures could know the children overboard claims were false, yet the Prime Minister himself was unaware.
Leland, I think this is the central issue. The Prime Minister says he wasn't told. We'll flip that over and ask a question, why wasn't he told? This issue was raging during the election campaign. It does seem curious that the Prime Minister didn't ask, but it seems entirely culpable that those around him, those senior bureaucrats who were there to look after him, didn't tell him. Clearly now we have the evidence that they did know. The Defence Department was telling them that the information that they had earlier provided, that children had been thrown overboard, was incorrect. But it wasn't getting through. It wasn't getting through to the Prime Minister. He says, but his own people, his own minders, his own people around him, designed to keep him informed, they appeared to know, but didn't tell him. Why?
You reported the Prime Minister today distanced himself from the former Defence Minister. Mr Reith is no longer in Parliament. Is that the end of the matter as far as he's concerned?
Well, I'm sure he would like it to be, but at the moment the Labor Party, and bear in mind it's a hostile Senate here, in the Senate Labor can force their own inquiries. These have enormously wide-ranging powers. It's very likely that they will try and get Mr Reith to come before the Senate. The Senate, after all, the Parliament, after all, can act as a court. However, this has been a long, vexed subject here. Very often Senates have tried to get serving ministers and former politicians before them to answer questions, but so far as I can find out, they've never achieved it. They've never actually dragged anyone before the Senate.
Labour is now saying that the government cheated its way back into office with the children overboard claims. Has Mr Howe's credibility been damaged?
Well, look, this week was the first week the Parliament resumed after the election, and the coalition MPs, government MPs, came here with their tails up. They thought they were going to have easy pickings of making some mileage of the opposition's failure to win for the third time in a row. In fact, the atmosphere here is really quite glum on the government benches. I think the Prime Minister's credibility has been damaged by this. I think those who say that he might stay on and fight in the next election may now be in something of a minority, and I suspect that the Treasurer was having some private difficulty suppressing the smirk today, because he, after all, on the front bench is one of the very few who comes out of this as a clean skin.
Slobodan Milošević has finally begun his defence at the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague, justifying his actions in Kosovo as a struggle against terrorism. He took the stand just over 2 hours ago, accusing NATO of fabricating an ocean of lies to back the 1999 bombing campaign in Yugoslavia.
Day 3, and a defiant Milošević began his defence in earnest. First, he presented a video on the 1999 massacre of ethnic Albanians in Račak. It was a tactic designed to cast doubt on whether the dozens killed there were civilians. The video alleged an international conspiracy to blame Serbs for major atrocities.
This is just an atom, even smaller than an atom of the truth, even less than an atom of the truth, in the ocean of lies and the product of propaganda and the abuse of global media as a means of war against my country.
Milošević restated his position that it is the West which was guilty of war crimes. His actions in Yugoslavia, he said, were an heroic defence against NATO aggression. Last night, Milošević put off his chance to refute the charges, instead launching a tirade against the tribunal's legitimacy. A trained lawyer, he complained his arrest was illegal and unconstitutional. The prosecution had orchestrated a media campaign against him, he said, and the tribunal and the media were a parallel lynch process which could not be impartial. Visibly irritated, the presiding judge cut off the former president's microphone.
You had the right of appeal, you did not take it. The matters, therefore, have all been dealt with, and your views about the tribunal are now completely irrelevant as far as these proceedings are concerned.
The reign of terror perpetrated...
The exchange followed a chilling presentation of evidence by the prosecution, portraying Milošević as a controlling figure in a web of murder and oppression. The locations differed, but the pattern was the same, the prosecution said. 6,500 men and boys from Srebrenica massacred, 5,000 murdered at Srebrenik, and 1,500 killed at Bratunac. In all, 66 charges, including genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes that left hundreds of thousands dead and 1 million homeless in the wars of Bosnia, Croatia and Kosovo.
Attacks predictably included verbal abuse, threats of violence, removal of identification, looting and burning of property, killing of livestock, murdering of non-combatants, rape of the women, and destruction of religious sites.
Milošević sat back and watched the video showing no emotion. He's made it clear tonight that he believes he was a peacemaker and not a criminal.
The trial of Slobodan Milošević is just the beginning of a legal process that could last for years. The tribunal is pursuing 20 other Bosnian Serbs, also indicted for war crimes.
Milan Milutinović, Slobodan Milošević's foreign minister and chief negotiator with the West. As a serving Serbian president, he's protected by the government because only he can call new elections. Reports say he may testify against his former boss. Nikola Šajnović, former Yugoslav deputy prime minister, but of more interest to The Hague, as Mr. Milošević's connection to the army, police and Albanian leaders. He's linked to the massacre at Račak and refuses to cooperate with the War Crimes Tribunal. Vlatko Stojiljković, the Serbian police minister, appointed to the post as the fighting in Kosovo intensified in 1998. And last, but by no means least, Dragoljub Ojdanić, a much-decorated career military man who rose to chief of staff, ultimately responsible for the activities of the army's feared Pristina Corps. Sooner or later, the authorities say, General Ojdanić and the rest will be joining Slobodan Milošević in The Hague.
I think they should go. I would want to convince these people to go willingly.
Are you prepared to mount an operation like you mounted in the case of Slobodan Milošević against these people?
If necessary, yes. Yes. After sending Milošević to Hague, our politics is clear.
And then there are the tribunal's most wanted men, the former Bosnian Serb president Radovan Karadzic and Ratko Mladic, his army commander. Street traders in Belgrade are cashing in on the public appetite for memorabilia of men seen by many as national icons. General Mladic was seen publicly in this select suburb of Belgrade last year. Many say he's still in Serbia. This is where Ratko Mladic lived when he was last in Belgrade. Although he hasn't been seen in public for months now, his presence in Serbia is the country's worst-kept secret. And that presents a big problem for the authorities. The longer he stays, the more pressure on them to seize him. But any operation to arrest him is fraught with risk, not least because to many, the general is a modern symbol of Serbian valor. He defended his own people, says this man. What he did was justifiable. He's a fighter for Serbian rights, not a war criminal, says another. If they try to harm him, there'll be at least 200 dead. But Serbia's security departments have new leaders now, and there's a determination to take risks in the long-term interests of the state. To guarantee the support of the West, they will have to act, and time is running out.
The Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat has finally admitted responsibility for ordering a huge shipment of weapons which was seized by Israel in the Red Sea last month. The admission came in a letter to the United States, which has hardened its position towards the Palestinians in the wake of the so-called Karine A scandal. Meanwhile, British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw has completed a whistle-stop tour of the region, during which he repeated calls for Mr. Arafat to clamp down on terrorist attacks.
Britain's Foreign Secretary Jack Straw inspects a fleet of Israeli emergency vehicles on standby in case of terrorist attacks. He took a message from Israel to the Palestinian leader: do more to stop the cycle of violence.
There are further steps which ought to be taken inside the occupied territories and elsewhere by the Palestinian Authority to do what everybody accepts is in their interests as well as the interests of getting this peace process moving.
Mr. Straw's urging Europe to support the American-led strategy of heaping pressure on the Palestinian leader to bring calm to the streets. But some EU nations, led by France, believe that Palestinian statehood should come first, a proposition Israel is highly unlikely to accept. Israel's Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's doing his talking with tanks and guns. This week's incursions into Palestinian-controlled towns were part of the biggest operation in the Gaza Strip since the Intifada began. The aim to root out factories where rocket launchers like these are being made by Palestinian militants. No complaints from Washington, despite the deaths of 5 Palestinian policemen. Yasser Arafat's credibility is at an all-time low in the United States as a result of the Karine A affair. After weeks of denying any knowledge of the 50-ton shipment of weapons, Mr. Arafat has finally accepted responsibility, not personally, but as the Palestinian leader. Despite an appeal from the United Nations, Mr. Arafat remains confined to the West Bank town of Ramallah, part of a plan by Ariel Sharon to sideline his old nemesis.
Do you think he's trying to turn your people against you?
You can ask my people, not me. My relations with my people is very strong. I am one of them.
It's true the 72-year-old has strong support, but there are signs he's losing his grip on power. Last Monday, Mr Arafat reportedly tried to punch West Bank security chief Jibril Rajoub, seen here, then pulled a gun on him for defying orders. Mr Rajoub is one of the men who Israel favours as a replacement for Mr Arafat.
Zimbabwean opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai has issued a statement in which he denies plotting to assassinate President Robert Mugabe. Party officials have, however, admitted to a British newspaper that Mr Tsvangirai took part in a secretly filmed meeting in Montreal. SBS's Dateline programme has alleged that the meeting discussed an assassination plot as part of a coup d'etat before Zimbabwe's presidential election. Britain's Guardian newspaper quotes a spokesman for Mr Tsvangirai saying that the meeting with a Montreal firm of political consultants did take place last December. However, the spokesman denied that there was any plot to assassinate Mr Mugabe, claiming the allegation is a smear tactic against the opposition leader. President George W. Bush has welcomed the visiting Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf as a friend and a key ally during a meeting between the two leaders in Washington. Musharraf is paying a highly symbolic visit to the White House after developing a new relationship with the US during the campaign in Afghanistan.
President Musharraf arrived to full red carpet treatment at the White House. 5 months after signing up to the US-led war on terror, the self-appointed president is enjoying his rewards.
President Musharraf is a leader with great courage and vision, and his nation is a key partner in the global coalition against terror.
Pakistan played a key role in the US campaign in Afghanistan. President Musharraf joined up under intense pressure, forced to choose between the West and Pakistan's former Taliban allies. It came at the expense of alienating radical Islamic sections at home. Now President Musharraf is looking to President Bush for the payoff. He used his Washington trip to push for debt relief and greater military cooperation. Taking advantage of the White House stage, President Musharraf also called on India to end the tense standoff between the two countries.
The immediate return of Indian forces to peacetime locations and the early resumption of dialogue between Pakistan and India is the way forward.
Similar pomp was laid on for the president's visit to the Pentagon. The only cloud over the visit is the face of kidnapped Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl.
I am reasonably sure he's alive, and I really very much hope, we all hope that he's alive. About getting him released, well, let me say we are as close as possible to getting him released.
But he's been contradicted in Pakistan, where amid tight security, the man suspected of masterminding the kidnapping faced court. British-born Islamic militant Sheikh Omar told the Karachi court Mr Pearl was already dead.
In Afghanistan, there's been a fierce gun battle at a US base in Kandahar, holding suspected Al-Qaeda and Taliban detainees. The firefight was captured on night-scope video taken from Kandahar Airport's runway. However, the unidentified assailants turned out to be friendly Afghan troops, contracted by the US to provide security. The United Nations Human Rights Commissioner Mary Robinson says David Hicks, the Australian captured in Afghanistan, should be granted prisoner of war status. She says there's evidence Hicks, who is now in captivity in the US camp at Guantanamo Bay, was in combat at the time he was captured. Meanwhile, John Walker Lind, the man known as the American Taliban, has pleaded not guilty at his second appearance in court. He's facing 10 charges, including conspiring to kill Americans.
Under cover of darkness, John Walker Lind arrives at the Alexandria, Virginia Federal Courthouse hours before his appearance. Far from the wild-looking figure who was arrested in Afghanistan, a neat, clean-shaven Lind appeared and politely replied, "Not guilty, sir," when asked to plead on the 10 charges facing him. At his request, the charges were not read out loud. His lawyers denied Lind had ever been part of Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda network or had anything to do with terrorist activity. They argued for a postponement of the trial till November. The judge will fix a date later this week, likely to be August or September. Lynn's parents were in the courthouse, as were the family of Johnny Mike Spann, the man killed in a riot at Mazar-e Sharif at the time Lynn was arrested there. Outside the court, Spann's widow said the family was satisfied that Lynn was being brought to account.
We're pleased. I'm glad to have been able to read the indictment this morning. We're pleased with the charges that the Attorney General has laid, and we expect Mr. Walker to be held personally responsible for all of the things that he has done.
But she was not so pleased with the prospect that Lynn could serve multiple life sentences.
Certainly, I should have preferred the death penalty myself.
And Americans will not tolerate traitors.
There was an attempt at contact between the two families as they left the court. Patrick Lind, John's father, made a gesture to shake the hand of Johnny Spann, but it was not reciprocated, and a security officer intervened as the Spann family disappeared into an elevator.
There's been a big job surge in Australia, but it's come with a jump in unemployment to 7%. Over 100,000 new full-time and part-time jobs were created in January. That was way above expectations of around 10,000. Employment Minister Tony Abbott is confident, however, that the jobless rate will drop in the months ahead.
Naturally, the government would prefer unemployment to be down rather than up, but I think we can be reasonably confident about the months ahead.
In the United States, the congressional inquiry into the Enron collapse is waiting to hear evidence from company whistleblower Sharon Watkins. The Vice President of Corporate Development at Enron, Watkins is likely to crack the wall of silence that other executives have presented to the inquiry. 4 months before it happened, she sounded a warning about Enron's likely collapse in a letter to Chairman Kenneth Lay. She outlined the corporation's highly suspect financial arrangements and warned that they would be seen as nothing but an elaborate accounting hoax. Watkins is due to appear in a few hours' time. To the finance figures, and the Australian dollar ended the day stronger against all the major currencies. The Australian share market closed at near record highs, with strength in banks and resources offset by weakness in News Corp. In Tokyo, the Nikkei surged past the symbolic 10,000-point mark, spurred on by gains on Wall Street, which rose 1.25% thanks to confidence in the strength of the expected economic upswing. A short time ago in London, the FTSE 100 was up more than 10 points. The economic crisis in Argentina is now taking its toll on the country's national sport, soccer. The home of Maradona and numerous other stars is struggling to keep its top football clubs going. And a draw in last night's friendly match with Wales will do nothing to restore Argentina's flagging pride.
Before tonight's game, Argentina's footballers stood for their national anthem, and they were playing for national pride, because while they're among the very best in the world, their country's finances are among the very worst. Argentina is in economic meltdown. It has defaulted on its debts and seen a wave of looting and rioting. Argentines now hope their famous football team can cheer up the nation this June by beating England and by winning the World Cup. It is a heavy burden on the players.
Winning the World Cup won't put bread on people's tables or create jobs or make people forget, but it will give great joy throughout the country if we can do it.
In 1986, after losing the Falklands War, national pride was also at stake. Argentina desperate to beat England with any weapon at hand. Perhaps the national team's finest hour was winning the World Cup in Argentina. These days, the same stadium is somewhat dilapidated. It's home to River Plate, Argentina's biggest football club. Like the country, its finances are in turmoil. River Plate's around £25 million in debt. Its fans can no longer afford tickets and merchandise, so revenue is plummeting. We depend on the economic prosperity of our fans, says the club president Jose Aguilar, and the fans have been badly affected by this country's problems. River Plate has debts running into millions of pounds. Now, with revenue tumbling, it's going to be harder than ever to repay them. The club is trying to sell its star players to Europe to make ends meet. Argentina loves its footballers, but when they're also export earners, it loves them even more.
To the weather now, and an active monsoon trough will continue to dump heavy rain over central Queensland and the tropics. Dry northeast winds over the interior of South Australia and Victoria, keeping the rain away. In the major centres, mostly sunny for Sydney and Perth, hot with late showers for Adelaide and Alice Springs. Looking further afield, more sunshine moving in on Saturday for much of New Zealand. In Southeast Asia, staying hot and humid in the region with thunderstorms in the Malaysian peninsula. Further north, monsoonal cloud over eastern India and Sri Lanka will disperse, bringing finer weather to the subcontinent. Heading west, a cold snap will grip parts of Central Europe with cool northerly winds for Berlin and Warsaw. In Africa, hot and blustery across the northern Sahara, bringing dust and sandstorms to the region. In South America, sunny for Caracas and the Caribbean, thundery showers breaking out in Paraguay. And for North America, partly cloudy but fine from Los Angeles to Mexico City. More snow flurries ahead for the Rockies. And that's the World News Tonight. I'm Lee Lin Chin. I'll be back with another bulletin at the same time tomorrow. We'll leave you tonight with a spectacular fireworks display as Hong Kong ushered in the Year of the Horse. Good night.